Samantha, welcome to Austin Next.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
And actually, even more importantly, welcome to Austin.
Thank you. I am especially glad to be here. I'm 1 month in now.
Oh, so it's old hat already, right?
Yes, of course, of course. I've been a Texan for far too long, all my adult life, pretty much. So I fit right in.
I feel like you're able to hold on to the Austin newbie status for 5 years. That's what I'm going to hold on to because
Oh, I like
five
that.
years is December. So I'm going to keep holding on to I'm still a newbie.
I was actually wondering that the other day. I was like, how long can I tell people, hey, I just moved here? Because it's so fun because I have so many friends here, so many other VCs here, so many founders here I know that it's like, it's fun whenever you first move here because everyone's going to prioritize like going to have a drink with you or going to party or going to have dinner. And then once you're here after a while, everyone's like, oh, Sam's here anytime. So I'm really trying to ride the wave.
Yeah, I'm holding on to that newbie status as long as I can. Because I keep doing this. Oh, I'm still there, but it's interesting because I feel like I'm connected. I feel like everybody, and I keep discovering new pockets.
I know. It's because it's growing too, which is a huge part of why I wanted to be here, right? Like there's new communities that I'm also finding. Everyone at our firm has spent a lot of time in Austin. And so we all are here often. But living here is different because you just like happen upon places. You don't really have to be as intentional about it as when you're traveling here. So it's been fun. Even only in my month, I found multiple new people I was not expecting to meet. So
What's also interesting is how growing it is and how it's you because of that growth you have all these new pockets, but then you don't realize how interconnected it is. I had somebody on the podcast, I won't say who, and it was we got connected. It was like, this is really interesting and I want to have them on. And they're like, oh, given what you do on in your dating, you probably know my husband. I was like, what? Like, oh yeah, I don't know him, but I follow him on X. It's like I had no idea. And it's like it's such a small world.
it really is. And that's honestly like the collisions that happen. I think that's one of the best things about the Austin ecosystem and something I'm so excited to now like be more an integral part of instead of, only hopping in a few times a month.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you're with Mercury. You're moving
Yes.
here. So I've interacted and kind of come across Mercury a little bit, but help me a little bit with okay. So what's Mercury's thesis? How big are you guys? How many funds? Let me know how it works.
Yeah. So Mercury, we're an early stage venture fund. We focus on software startups in the seed and series A. So we do all early stage stuff, always have been early stage. Mercury is investing out of its fifth fund right now. And so we each kind of lead a very specific sector focus. All the partners do at the fund.
How,
I
how big
specifically
was how big was Fund Five?
160 million.
Okay, hundreds.
Yeah, so we're investing out of a $160 million fund. We have a really high conviction portfolio model. So out of that $160 million, we're going to do 20 to 25 investments. And so we get really involved with our portfolio companies and help them get to scale. And then at that point, it kind of opens up our time as a partner to go and do another deal. So each partner does only a handful of deals a year. So maybe 2 deals a year. And we do that so that we can really like onboard, spend a lot of time with our companies up front, help them solve what we identify as what we call the white hot risk, which is, hey, let's all get alignment on what the key risk is for this business over the next 12 to 18 months. And then once we identify that, we come up with risk mitigation strategies. We all stay super aligned on it. And then we just work really hard to make sure we mitigate those risks. And then after that, then we don't then we're not as involved. And so they don't need us quite as much. And so then from there, then that's how we really make room for about 2 deals a year per partner. So high conviction model, early stage, all software. Each one of us has a sector expertise, but generally we are like sector agnostic. But I lead our fintech and Web3 practice. So a lot of the work that I do is in thinking about the next iteration of the global financial system, which is really fun.
So I want to focus on the early stage for a moment, and you're saying seed and Series A, is that driven by opportunity, like when you happen to find them, and are they in it, or is it sector specific? There's some you're liking to get in earlier, some you like to see more traction. How are you thinking about that, or you like we like to get into seed and then maybe write a second check getting to A?
It's all of the above, to be honest, but I can give you a little bit more detail on them because what's happening right now with the AI, with the pace of innovation, with generative AI, is pretty crazy, and so that is pushing us even earlier. So more of our checks lately have been seed rather than A. But that's a function of some other things that we can cover. But generally, we keep it flexible between the seed and the Series A because it can mean different things depending where you are in the country, depending what
That was
industry
literally
you're
going to be my next question because I
in. Yeah.
don't know pre-seed, angel, seed. I don't know what any of that means. So how are you defining seed? Like, do
Yes.
they have a product? Do they have revenue? Of course, by
Yeah.
sector, that means
Almost
different things.
always.
Yeah.
Almost always. So sorry, there's usually always a product and some sort of revenue.
Okay.
So like when we're looking at, we've done a little bit earlier. Like I actually did a deal last year that was pre-product, pre-revenue, but it was a spin out of a big fintech company in New York called Republic. And so then it made a lot of sense. They already had the executives in place. They have the absolute all-star team. And they had a lot of the tech stack because of the spin out of Republic. So, but then we had to build product and we had to figure out how to launch product into market. Like that's a lot earlier than typically we go. Usually we're doing somewhere post product, post revenue, because where we think we really can help as a VC, all VCs, our job is to add some value and make sure we get out of the way for founders, right? And so where we think we can really help is on some of the go-to-market scaling work. So we have operating partners that we've hired that sit with us in every meeting at Mercury. They're on our payroll and they're incredible. And so when you're doing early product launches or you've scaled to 1 million plus ARR and you're trying to figure out how am I going to get to 10, like those are some of the things we help founders think through on, like, what is their ICP? How are they targeting that audience? How can you scale most efficiently? So those are the questions that we're really good at working with founders on. So that lends to what we call seed, which is post product, post revenue. And then we've gone all the way up to, we've invested in companies that are like 7 million ARR and plus, which are
Mhm.
very later stage A's for us. We call those mature A's. So we kind of all across the early stage. But to the AI comment earlier, right now the world is just moving so fast. And like things that we all thought were super relevant and going to be the next whatever a year from now, a year ago, aren't really relevant anymore because competition heated up so quickly. And so, with that in mind, we've just doubled down on our sector expertise and our sector focus, which then lends us to be able to go in a lot earlier because of what we call our unique insight into those specific markets. So now we're pretty comfortable doing some earlier stage seed stuff.
Yeah, how are you thinking about, it, especially in the software space, especially with these kind of AI enabled technologies, where maybe thinking in, or say, the SaaS space, or maybe in the fintech. I'll let you take the question where you want, where we're all seeing an obvious product or an obvious type of solution that is needed, as are many entrepreneurs, and I hear a lot of you hear a lot of the same kind of pitch. um, it's an obvious need. So, 50 companies have shown up. So how are you thinking about, because you're probably getting that same 50 pitch, um, you're going to choose A, B, C, or D?
Yeah. So, like, if I'm rephrasing the question, is it how am I looking at companies and being able to diligence companies in a world where there's like a lot of them popping up because a lot of the needs are pretty obvious on what's being solved right
Right.
now?
You have that. It's the sense that we're getting to almost red ocean opportunity because of the AI enablement, that we get to almost red ocean competition at
Yeah.
essentially seed stage opportunities.
Yes. And so this is the thing our industry is going to continue to grapple with, and entrepreneurs are going to have to just figure out, right? How we think about it and how we're trying to protect our investments is one, this depends on which sector specifically, but I'll keep it general and we could dig in sector specific if you want. But a really strong competitive moat. So what does that look like? In industrial AI, it's data, right? In certain other vertical AI plays, it's definitely data, and it's how you collect that proprietary data and then what you do with it. The in fintech, it has a lot to do with different types of distribution partnerships. And so there's like really interesting stuff happening across stable coins and payments and some other things we've been looking at and investing in for a few years. And so what we found is like the best thing for founders to do right now is just have your distribution partnerships really locked in, and create stickiness on the tech integration pieces of that. So it kind of differs industry to industry, but you have to be really knowledgeable about your space, which again we call unique insight when we're looking at founders, because we
Sure.
want to know, like, what does the founder think the long-term competitive moat's going to be here in a world that is moving this fast, that is this crazy? And then how are they building around that? And so in a way, if I had to summarize all this in a way where a lot of funds, and especially funds like ours that primarily did B2B SaaS, you have to change the way you look at the world now, because it's just so different, because competition is so steep, and you can spin up an MVP over a weekend and start getting customers to test it out, and that's a whole new world. And so I think instead of being hyper focused on metrics, especially at the Series A, it's like, yeah, LTV to CAC is still very important. Revenue and efficiency and quality of revenue is still very important. But what's actually just as important, if not more important, at least in my mind, is, are these founders the right people, hiring the right people to continue to stay above the curve, because innovation is moving so fast? It doesn't matter if your metrics are perfect today, because we cannot predict. That is no like good predictor of retention for those customers in the future anymore. And so we're having to rethink this with really leaning on founders' unique insight, ability to hire, ability to fire, and then ability to just stay ahead of the curve.
How much do you think about the ability to, I'll put it as shape the future? Because we have so much of these trends, and as you think about where people are in the stack, right? Obviously, if you're lower down in the stack, in the tech stack, and say at a, you know, I'll use large companies here, whether you're like NVIDIA or like the model companies, they're obviously shaping what's above them in many ways. But even in, you know, even at the application layer or any of these others, your ability to shape what's happening, back in this, getting back to the founder, is what change, I think, becomes a lot of what changes, right? Because your product, you said, some of the products are able to change so quickly now. I mean, like, look, I can't code. I've never coded. Um, and some of the stuff that I've been able to do with just ChatGPT or Claude, or, has been amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so the ability to use these things, and we're just getting started, right? Like like, this is the worst AI will ever be. And so the ability to, take that future and pull it forward becomes one the actual superpowers, I think, of these founders, more so than when I hear the kinds of founders that say, like, oh, well, I saw a problem, I looked at I took the list and said that's an interesting thing to go attack. And I think those are the ones who I'm concerned are going to get, quickly beaten by the founders that said, I'm going to go shape the future of this industry or that industry.
Yeah. I think that there are definitely different founder profiles. And, it doesn't mean that the ones who are solving a very specific, let's say, niche problem that can now be solved with AI that hadn't been solved before, that still actually might get solved. And it might be an okay exit, right? Because a corporation, they're still far behind. They're slower to adopt because of bureaucracy and other things. It's harder for them to innovate. And so they are going to be buying some of these. On the other hand, why we are worried about those types of companies right now is because we do believe a lot of this now within innovation budgets, and not even innovation budgets, just within functional teams at corporates. They can build stuff over a weekend, like I said, right? So with a bunch of these AI coding tools and with a bunch of the other things, you can build a very specific workflow that you need, so you don't have to use a general purpose one anymore. So I think there's going to be some places for tuck-ins. If the companies say already exists and they weren't really AI native and they're trying to figure out what to do, I would say talk to all of your corporate partners and get acquired now, right? Because if you have some sort of tech chops and you have some innovation around AI, that's what they're looking for right now because they need that to permeate throughout their organizations. If you wait too long and think, oh, this is a phase or a trend or things are going to go back to normal, I think you will absolutely be left in the dust. And so when we're thinking about founders now, it's absolutely vision. Like you said, Jason, right? I think that's what I'm saying is what where before there was a playbook to follow. B2B SaaS was not that hard. Like we always tell our founders, we were like 80% of building a B2B SaaS company is a playbook. 20% is your unique insight and vision and being able to capture that. Now that's probably flipped on its head. I don't know what the percentages are, but it is no longer, hey, you do these things, you get these retention metrics, you get these revenue metrics, and then you're going to raise a nice series A and then a nice series B, and then you're probably going to get acquired for this multiple. Like all that's out the window. And so in that world, how do we do our job as VCs? How do founders do their job? And it's paint the vision for the future and then know how to execute on it and stay ahead of it and pivot as much as you need to. We've seen companies that have pivoted 3 times in a year and they landed on a killer use case the third time.
Yeah,
That's fine.
and I think it breaks. I think let's differentiate between the venture backed startup and a great business. I think all of these tools create opportunities for great businesses.
Yes.
Like you can create a great startup business that is going to make individuals have wonderful lives. And that was that previously might have been what we would have thought of as venture backed businesses. And I think understanding the difference now.
Yes. And that you actually don't need as much venture funding.
Right.
That's what's really interesting. It comes at a good time because the market is still, although it's thawing, the market has not been good as any founder, well, most founders are going to tell you over the past few years, it's been really tough to raise money, and especially at the seed stage. And so I think like now with AI, you don't have to. So then that makes our job as an early stage investor think, okay, well, why does someone need venture funding then? Because if you can do tech super cheap with all the AI tools, marketing is starting to be like taken over with AI tools. You can start to do all these things. It's like, then where do you put your venture dollars? And I
Right.
think that comes into the founders shaping the future.
Yeah. And it's an interesting case from the pure software play to your point, like that's actually the bigger question. What is it that you're doing? Is it purely execution, right? It should be like we're going faster versus previously it was something else, right? You can augment a lot of different ways. You can just like, buy this app, that, and like, that's not that expensive versus, hiring 50 coders or whatever it was in the past.
For sure. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I have been thinking about it and you just kind of like reminded me. But something I'm super excited about with AI, as you just calling like great businesses that don't need to be venture backed, right? So now you can build a tech scalable business much easier without having to take venture funding. But maybe your market's not as big, which is why venture never would have gone to those markets in the first place. So, like, let's take an example. As I mentioned before we jumped on the podcast, I'm pregnant. I'm having a kid in a few months. During my first pregnancy, I'm texting with all my VC friends, like, where are all the apps that are literally here to like help pregnant women? We're a massive market. We're spending a bunch of money because we're trying to figure out life. Pregnancy is a very confusing time. And so like there just aren't a lot of resources out there. And there's a lot of stuff. There's so much that you can do in tech innovation to one, capture wallet share, but two, also just add value to that segment. And now with AI, companies like that, it's very hard to get venture funding because there's not a lot of venture capitalists who have been pregnant before because most of them are men. And so it's tough for them to get venture funding. Well, now it doesn't matter.
Right.
Now, if you know how to build and spin up an app, which anyone can do,
Right.
then you can do these things. So I'm super excited to see what you called earlier great businesses that spin up, that are serving a market that is traditionally underserved for whatever reason, and just going after it. And then the next iteration of that is seeing which ones do break out to massive scale. And they can take venture funding then on their own terms whenever they want. And it's going to be a fun way to test out new markets.
Or never do. If you make this app and then
Yes.
that scales is making you millions of dollars, then then have that one, then go to another one, then go to another. Like, that's the question. There are a set of these types of things that are just sit in this world of that are non venture scalable, but will actually be creating things of need. And versus, as I see right now, the growth of the physical world. We're getting back into the physical world. I understand that Mercury does a lot, in the in software. But I mean, one of the things that I talk a lot about, in Austin specifically, is it is the intersection of atoms, bits, and intelligence. So it is that intersection of the physical world and the digital world. So that's the software that's driving that, like, autonomous vehicles, it's defense tech, it's advanced manufacturing. So like, that's the kinds of things that are starting to be, and obviously that needs a lot more capital than say just the pure play digital types of things. Now, when I think about pure play digital, and that, as we say, going down the stack of like foundational models, well, yeah, you probably need to go to San Francisco, because that's where you're going to find that very specific narrow range of talent necessarily that has that agglomeration effect. But understanding those things versus the application layer and understanding what's at that application layer. I don't know how much stuff in the App Store and Apple. What, maybe now at this point, 99.9% of it probably would that make sorry 99.9% of it that makes money probably doesn't need venture dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I've probably not spent as much time talking about this as I should. So I'm glad we're talking about it here, in a public setting. Why not? Let's brainstorm. So if we're going down that path, which is highly likely, then where do venture funding come in? Yeah, maybe there's a hardware component that collects proprietary data. Like when I talked about industrial AI earlier, we have a partner who leads our industrial AI sector. He's perfectly fine with touching something with a hardware component. So once in a while we do it if it's driving proprietary data. And so like that is an interesting one. That still does cost money. And so then that's makes sense. Where I think people would still assume or want venture dollars, and maybe this is because because I'm a VC and I have to hope people will want venture dollars, or I'm at a job and please everyone come meet me and hire me. But where I would think it might be in expansion to markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we go back to thinking about the world being as competitive as we already covered that it's going to be, because it's so easy to spin up MVPs and good tech, it's so easy to test the market. If you're on to something and people know about it, so many more people are going to come to the table. So then a lot of it does have to do with how quickly you can take down markets. And so then you win, not necessarily by being the first mover, but by capturing market share as quickly as possible. And that typically tends to work best when you have people who are trying to constantly throw money at you. If we look at, the Ubers of the world. And so I think like there's still going to be a place for venture. It just might look very different than what it looks like now.
Right. No, I definitely agree. And it's just going
Yeah.
to be interesting to see which sectors are driven by the, back to, like you said, like network effects, like how many, Uber, Lyfts, like those type of network effect driven can you win? Like there can't be more than two or three, right? Versus the app, versus things on the app store. Like you can have that long tail scenario where you can have the pregnancy apps be like, look, if this doesn't work, I need something lots of people can fill in, because there's probably enough differentiation and they're easy enough to build now at this point that people can be um, people can build a lot and make enough money to have that. I don't know necessarily, does there need to be, one to rule them all? Possibly, like, as I said, but I think there's a lot of that stack. And, is it it's like, so I invest in my own health companies, and I see a lot of kind of, on the, some kinds of the application layer, if you will, like in the drugs, device, diagnostics. I actually think there might be some value migration away from those into the kind of down the stack a little bit, and how we deliver those and how we build those might be where some of the things are coming.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm super interested, by the way, to see what AI does for the healthcare industry. I'm very bullish and excited about it because it's just like being able to solve very, very, very complex problems in a way that hasn't been able to be solved before, or it took decades to solve, is going to be pretty cool. I'm
you
excited about
you
that.
have the massive disruption in the ability to solve it, and now we have to have the massive disruption in the business models to go with it.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, not just related to healthcare, but I'm super interested to hear your take on that. But there's going to be business models that emerge over the next few years that we haven't even thought of yet.
Yes, and we
And
have to, like,
that's going to be fun.
the shifts in the abilities for us to make these kinds of changes, because I was going to put, like, it wasn't, when we were talking about sense, like, it wasn't cloud computing that drastically changed software. It was cloud computing plus SaaS. It's the technological innovation mixed with the business model innovation. And I think too often, and I'm sure that you get this all the time, in as VC, like, people get enamored with the technological innovation, and it is very, very rare that the technological innovation in and of itself is enough. It is, what is the, how is it implemented? What is the business model that goes along with it? How does that affect things? And so I think that is the key component as well. And I see it so often when you have, especially with highly, highly technical founders, that it's just like, well, my widget is enough.
Yeah. And yeah, the world does not work. If you build it, they will come. I also came from a deep tech background, by the way. I was at a firm before where we did some medical device and we did a lot of climate, a lot of hardware. And so I spent about 4 years doing that. But recently we passed on a founder. The founders are incredible. They're repeat founders. They know everyone in their very particular space. They had the unique insight. They had the vision. But all of that was on product and engineering. And you couldn't get to how this is going to build a long-term sustainable moat. You couldn't get to how you're going to build a long-term revenue model. Like, we just couldn't get there. And the company was later stage. So this wasn't like an early pre-seed or early seed company. Like, these answers, that we at least needed something in those answers. They're kind of at the forefront of certain pieces of like AI development specifically, in Web3, and we just couldn't get there. And so um, they might figure it out, but someone else might figure it out pretty quickly. So we ended up having to pass on the company, which was so sad because I really loved the founders. But ultimately, it's you're right, it's marrying the two.
So this is a terrible pivot in this, but I'm going to question. So you were in Houston. Mercury's mostly in Houston. You moved here. What was the impetus for the move?
Yeah, so Mercury's been headquartered in Houston from the very beginning. So Mercury has always been in Texas, and then we always covered Austin. So like we've been investing in Austin for decades. Someone is always here. One of our investment partners is probably here at least once a week, just because we have so many companies here. But as Austin just took off and started growing over the past 5 years or so, it was hard for us to keep up because we were coming in town to see our portfolio companies, network with a few of our VC friends, make sure that we're meeting founders, but not being in the mix of it really started to, like, we saw our specific deal flow from Austin decreasing. And we were like, hey, we need more of a presence there. And so we'd been talking about it for a few years. And I was very excited to raise my hand and be like, let me come. So, so I moved to Austin. We already have a few people here, actually, not necessarily on the investment team, but we have an operating partner here. Her name is Lisa Robert. She's our chief product officer. Our COO, Jackie Pfister, is here. We have some venture advisors here. One's name is Eric Huddleston. He sits on a lot of our boards with us. Like I said, we have multiple portfolio companies here. So we have an ecosystem here. We just needed an investment partner here as well to make sure that we're driving as much activity as we can because we're so excited about everything happening. We're so excited about some of the frontier tech stuff you've already hit on and some of the software applications that come along with that. And so just being in the mix of it is just really the only way to make sure that you're seeing the best deals, you're funding the best entrepreneurs, and that the entrepreneurs want our money. That's half the battle, right? And so we want to make sure that we have a presence and that everyone gets to know us too.
So how do you see? Because you said you raised your hand, but then you lead the the fintech practice. I would have, from my sense in being here, when I think fintech and Texas, I think Dallas.
Yeah.
Now, push if my sense is wrong or right. Like, how do you think? How does that kind of set as you leading the sector, but then being in Austin? How do you kind of feel like
Yeah,
that
you're
sets up?
you're right. You're right. So there's not Austin isn't necessarily known for its fintech scene.
Right.
But that's okay because like I said, like each partner has a sector focus, but we also invest across each other's sectors. So I have companies that are not fintech companies, just like some of my partners have fintech companies that I'm not involved with at all. And so we actually invest across each other's sectors. And so we're very collaborative. And so me being here makes the most sense for Mercury. If I was choosing where I needed to be very specific for my sector, it would be New York, but I'm not moving to New
Sure.
York. And so it's like then the next best thing is be in Austin for sure. So then we're growing Mercury's presence, not just Sam's presence. So that's how I think about it. It's really about making sure Mercury is here and that when the partners come and when the rest of our team comes, like we're going to open an office soon, we're going to have a physical space. So then, our founders can come there. We can take founder meetings. It's really just building more of an office here as opposed to just building our fintech sector.
Well, okay. Question: you mentioned New York, kind of triggered. How do you see? Now, this is more of a fintech question, or broader. How do you see the Texas Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange opening an office or they're opening another second exchange in Dallas? What do you see the effects of that both on the Texas innovation ecosystem and then from a finance and fintech perspective on Texas?
Yeah, I think it's going to be amazing for fintech. I'm super excited about that. Some of my dearest friends live in Dallas, so I was there last weekend. I'm going to be there again in 2 weeks. So I'm already spending a lot of time in Dallas because of what they're doing in fintech. Capital Factory, has a big presence in Dallas. They are sending me fintech deals a lot. So a lot of that activity is happening. Where, if we zoom out and kind of think about the macro, and where that positions Texas. The way I think about it is this way. So Texas has always had an innovation scene. By no means have we been New York or have we been San Francisco, right? But we've had an innovation scene. It's getting better and better and better as time goes on and we get more exits and we recycle more capital and more VCs move here and more founders move here, et cetera, tech talent. But what this is going to do is one of the things that was kind of always holding Texas back was that we didn't have the full ecosystem to just continue either the funding journey, continue the talent acquisition journey, multiple different things, kind of depending what sector you're in. And so, what I love about Texas Stock Exchange and what I love about some of the other things that are happening on the state level is that it's just showing. I think someone else uses this. I hope it's not a political slogan, but Texas is open for business. And not only are we open for business, but like we're innovating. So the more Texas can continue to innovate, this is happening in Bitcoin mining, for example, too, which is really important for energy infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So the more Texas is allowing at the state level innovation that brings capital, talent, and just innovative thinking to the state, the better all the ecosystems are going to be. So then we need a high speed rail between, the triangle. And then we can go to Dallas. I could go to Dallas after this and be home by dinner if
All
we
right,
had the
all
high
right.
speed
Hold
rail.
on.
Right. And so like
Hold
connecting
on. You threw out high speed rail. I just threw this out on X the other day, so you're gonna have to this. Give me, and this is a purely. I've been open minded and curious here. Give me give me the case for high speed rail that doesn't boil down to airports suck.
oh, it's about the time. for sure. So I will say, I'm a
A
full
plane's
on.
faster.
No, but getting to the airport,
That's
it's
airport. That's
total
airports
amount of
suck.
time.
I said
Well,
it can't boil down to getting to the airport, standing at the airport, being there longer. I said it can't boil down to airports suck.
well, then I don't really think there's an argument because ultimately the argument is it's time saved. And so if I'm thinking about flying to Houston, which I have since
Right.
I've lived there, I've flown to Houston and I've driven to Houston and I've done bonding.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out what the best way is on like a 2.5 hour thing. It takes the same amount of time to drive as it does to fly, even though the flight's, 30 minutes.
Right.
But it's more annoying because you have to get the Ubers, you have to wait for the Ubers at the airport, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a full, like between drive and fly, full just airport suck. That's an excuse.
No argument.
The high speed rail, though, theoretically, could get me to Houston in an hour. Nothing else can do that. A plane can't do that because I have to go through the airport to get on the plane, right?
My point. This is and I literally put this out like 2 days ago. So that's why it was literally on my mind when you said this. And like I'm not like against it in any way. My concern is looking at history is that argument won't hold because I think that the high speed rail station will turn into an airport. Everything we don't like about airports will go to the high speed rail.
Well, it's not that way. If you look at other high speed rails across the world, right? Trains are just very efficient. And so, like, it's not, you don't have the same type of boarding process. You have multiple cars where people can board. You can come in and go to the different terminals very easily or the different, stations very easily. So it's like,
But airports used to be that
it's so
way.
faster, but they're not anymore.
Well,
So, are
I
you saying because of security threats,
I'm
they're going
saying
to
all the things we don't all the cases all the cases that we make about why high speed rail is better was the same thing. Like airports used to be like this in the 50s and 60s, and so like that's why I always make the point of like the argument only is airports suck. My
okay,
concern is that is like I
but
see the same
airports,
I see the same trajectory that would happen with the high speed rail.
but that was like 70 years ago. So it's like, okay, airports started to suck really bad after 9/11, right? So it's like, okay, fair enough. And I'm very glad we have security, and I'm very glad airports suck because I feel safe, getting on an airplane, somewhat. So the thing though with rail, if for 50 years it is an incredibly more, it cuts your travel time in half, it creates more commerce, idea exchange, talent exchange among the three major cities, then it's 100% worth it, even if that's 20 years. Because being able to make sure Texas is positioned is making sure that these three cities are as interconnected as possible and removing any kind of barrier or hassle or inefficiency in connecting those cities to me is a win. But I'm obviously being selfish here because I travel so much. I want to just be able to jump on a train, go to Houston, go to Dallas, come home.
the remember I moved from California and that high speed rail debacle. So that's the image I have in mind. So the kind of
Fair
things.
enough. Fair
The vision sounds amazing kind of
Yes.
situation. So yeah.
Yes. Well,
And
I would say
I've ridden high speed rail both in Japan and in Europe.
yes. And
Um,
to me, they are much preferable ways to
the
travel.
interesting thing, and this is totally off topic that we've gone, but the interesting thing because I do think, but by the way, I do actually think that the Texas Triangle is a really fascinating and superpower of Texas because Texas and California are the only two ecosystems, or the only two states that can actually be a mega region because they have multiple large ecosystems. I think Florida will be there, but like the outside of Miami, like the other ones aren't big enough, really big enough yet to have
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And other than that, there's no other state that actually has multiple large ecosystems. When we think of the other ones, it's really just one. And only until recently with the Bay and some of the stuff in LA, but that's really only been the last couple of years, like with the Gundo and the like. California, like the Bay, LA, and San Diego, there's been like an active effort to like not integrate. I mean, you'd see like individual VCs go down and like startups like go up to like beg for money, but like there's been no interconnectivity. When I moved to Austin and raised my hand that I'm like, I'm here, I met people in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio without trying.
Yeah.
And on top
Yeah.
of that, there's a wonderful lack of inferiority. Like look, I said I was in San Diego a long time. I drive the inferiority complex drives me crazy because they focus so much on trying to be like the Silicon Valley instead of trying to be their own unique, leaning to what they are. And you didn't have that here. Like the idea of like Houston going like, well, if only we were like Dallas. Those words have never been spoken in the history of Houston, right? So like you have that same kind of like competition, but like cooperation. And so yes, so the idea that you have that idea exchange and you have like that you go to Dallas in a day, come back easy. I'm all for it. I think it actually in Texas more than anywhere else. If you can make that happen, whether it be by plane, by train, I don't care how. Right? Like the point is, I'm
Right.
all for that. Um,
You
it
know,
just
it's
yeah.
interesting because this reminds me. So South by, we just got off of South by. So a bunch of my friends were in town. A bunch of my VC friends were in town from the Bay Area. And some of them have spent a lot of time in Austin. Some of them haven't. A few of them have moved here and maybe moved home, as we already discussed earlier. Some of them are thinking about moving here. And when I ask them, like, why, what's interesting about Austin for you, or what's interesting about Texas? And they say, people just seem so collaborative here. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. My entire career has been in Texas. And so I only have comparison based on what others' experiences have told me and my friends have told me. But I found that to be really fascinating. That like they're like, there's just such a sense. Like all the firms are actually, yeah, y'all are competitive, but you also are super collaborative. And I
So
was like, we had to be that way because like a lot of funds have not been around for decades, like Mercury and a few others. And so you kind of had to, because when you're the only people, you're trying to grow an ecosystem. And it was always Texas as the ecosystem. Of course, we have little rivalries among the cities, but I think Austin's the clear winner when it comes to tech. In that doesn't mean great tech companies can't come out of Houston or Dallas. It's that Austin is small enough with the industry driven by tech that you create all these different collisions and that you have a concentration of the talent and the ideas and other things. Where in Houston, it will take me almost the same amount of time to drive from one end of Houston to the other as it does from the edge of Houston to Austin. And that's really crazy when you try to get a concentration of innovators into one room. And so you can't really do that in some of the bigger cities, especially DFW as well. So when I think about it that way, it's like Austin had a clear advantage and definitely just continues to double down on it, which worked really well for him.
Austin's obviously growing. Like Austin is growing because it goes now up all the way like to Cedar Park and Georgetown, out to
Really?
Bastrop. Like the idea of Austin, and I'm going to push back a little bit on some of the narrative of other places when we think of Silicon Valley, right? Because people are like, oh, well, because everyone now equates it and like, oh, it's San Francisco. It's not San Francisco. It's only been San Francisco since like 2010,
Right.
right? It's San Jose all the way to San Francisco. Um, since the 1970s, sort of what the 1970s when the Traders 8 came out there, and the idea, like anybody who's driven there, like going from San Jose up to San Francisco, like good luck if you can do that in like an hour and a half to 2 hours through that traffic. So part of this agglomeration effect that we're all like on top of each other, you had those pockets, obviously the 15 minutes around of Stanford, and you have that now, in certain areas of San Francisco. But sometimes I call a little bit BS that there's this like, oh, it's all walkable, it's all next to each other. You had Sand Hill Road, like you have those like areas. And yes, by the way, I do agree. Like I've driven around Houston, it is gigantic. I think
And so, I mean, the thing is, yeah, I mean, I did a conference in San Jose not that long ago. I flew into San Francisco, got an Uber, took it down. Like it's doable, it's fine, just like it is in Houston. But I think the difference is when you're right, because it's not about the time. right? So maybe that was the wrong way to phrase it up, because it's not about, oh, I have to drive an hour and a half to be around innovative, like an innovative ecosystem. No, it's not that. It's that in the, let's just call it the entire Bay Area,
Right.
right? In that area, you have so many. You
Right.
just have so many more that it's okay if you're a little bit more spread out. Where in Houston, for example, we have a bunch of people who work in oil and gas, which is innovative in its own right, but not necessarily in the way we think about it in our tech world, right? You have NASA and you have healthcare. And so you have all these different places that have to innovate within their own industries, but those people aren't thinking about like, oh, how can I be the next Google necessarily? They're thinking about, oh, how can I help Exxon get a better bottom line?
Right.
And so when you're thinking differently, when you are just thinking about how can I be the next Google, that's probably an outdated reference. I should probably update that now. But
Google's going through their own innovator's dilemma right now. So
you
yeah.
must again. How can I be the next OpenAI is what I should be saying now. But also that one's interesting. I don't know. I'll workshop it. But when you're thinking about how can I be the next amazing $1 billion company, right? Or billions of dollars a company.
I would say like billions not cool anymore.
I
Trillions
know, I'm
cool.
like so out of date. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Okay. I got to workshop some of this. But I think when you're thinking about that in a city where everyone you run into isn't also thinking about that, or when I run into people when I'm in Houston and I run into people at, my friend's house, dinner parties, cocktail parties, the bars, whatever, people are like, what do you do? And I say VC. Half the time I have to explain to them what that means by saying, have you ever seen Shark Tank? It's like that, but like not as cool. It's a real job. So I mean, that's reality on the ground in massive cities that have a lot of other industries where people they're not reading TechCrunch every day.
Th-
They're not paying attention to the news on X. They're not on, tech Twitter. So
th-
it's
There,
like,
there is an interesting thing to point the when the Bay and I no I and I absolutely agree, and I wasn't saying it was you in the sense like they're just people I think at times that that make out the Bay in Silicon Valley to be physically smaller than it is. And I
mm,
think that they're that because they think they push sometimes too hard of like, Houston or Austin or something. They're like, well, we need to like, they essentially go like everything should be downtown. And I'm like, that's not the way even Silicon Valley works.
right.
And so like that it's my counter narrative to sometimes that, right? Like it all should be in one spot. I'm like, that's not how any of these places work.
Yeah, to me, one spot is Texas.
Right. And I
But
think,
one spot within that is like micro
yes,
ecosystems within that, and then micro ecosystems within that. And so like
A
that's
hundred,
it.
a hundred
Yeah.
percent. No, that is the perfect thing because I think when you start at nothing and when you're early in, and I always use Chattanooga. I don't know why that's the one in my head. Like if you're starting from nothing, like the singular spot, you have to, and you don't have enough density. And you're like, I literally need to get everybody together. Then the single building makes sense. You then when you hit a certain threshold, and I don't know what we'll call it the top 20 in the country or whatever,
Yeah.
you get to that kind of that Cambrian explosion moment, then it's exactly what you just said. Then you kind of go like, okay, the idea of one spot that makes no sense anymore. Then it is okay. You probably have the energy neighborhood, the bio neighborhood, the where you do have to have enough of like I'm running into the right people and this. I mean, the story I love this. So I had Danny Crichton from Lux Capital on the podcast,
Nice.
and I think he hit it so perfectly when we talked about 4 a.m. paint shops. And it was like in New York City, paint shops are open at 4 a.m. And the reason that they're open at 4 a.m. is because artists keep really weird hours and they run out of green paint in the middle of the night. But the ecosystem in those neighborhoods know this. So they're open till 4 a.m. so the artists can come down, get their bottle of green paint, and go back up and paint in the middle of the night. And so you have that perfect kind of synergy in those micro neighborhoods. And so you
Yes.
can go and run into the right people and these kinds of things. So having those neighborhoods, and then the catch is being when you're in a larger ecosystem, whether it be Austin, Houston, or the Bay or whatever, is then the great thing happens when you have those creative collisions across those sectors. That becomes the hard part. What's the right connectivity that drives across these things? Because the idea of the one ring to rule them all across, like no, that doesn't exist, right? You might have institutions like a YC or what, like, that everyone kind of looks to, but even then, like, they don't own everything. There's a good brand that everybody looks to. Or I always kind of joking, like in Boston, like there isn't the bio group. Like, you mean everybody? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so to have those kind of, whether it be honest brokers or whatever, but it was really funny. I don't know if you know, like Lenny's podcast, the product guy, he put
Yep.
out like all the data recently on that they had uh, for YC. And for as great of a brand they are, if you look at the data, you're like, yeah, you guys really understand like consumer and B2B. And I think it was fintech. It was like three groups. Yeah, those are the three. And then they had their data on the other, like they had three other groups. And they're like, yeah, you should stay away from those. You don't seem to be really good at them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's right. And that's like coming from Houston, right? Houston has often tried to find, hey, how do we continue to stimulate our economy with innovation and tech innovation specifically? Of course, as that's the conversation Mercury is involved in, just because that's where we live. And they're trying to do it within the ecosystems that already exist there. And they've done a pretty good job. So, like TMC Innovation, Texas Medical Center Innovation, they spin out some really, really interesting stuff. They figured out how to fund really interesting research translation out of universities. So they're figuring that out. But that's very sector specific. And so then if you're a fintech software founder, of which we had one who he was from Houston, he moved from the Bay Area after working at Coinbase, moved to Houston. He came, we met him, we funded him. He was like, okay, after about a year, he's like, I got to get back to California. And he left and went back to California. And now he's gotten amazing other VCs on his cap table and other things. And so it's a great success story. But ultimately, he just didn't have enough of what he needed from a sector standpoint.
Right.
And I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think I would like us to have that in Texas. But in general, in Texas, I don't think we have that robust of a community yet around fintech. But as we alluded to earlier, we think it's going to grow.
And I think there are, as I said, I think there are first principles to ecosystems that make a lot of sense in how you think about them. And it's not like dogmatic that you cannot build these things if you're not there. But when I think about like looking at New York, like you can draw a straight line from culture and history, from Dutch fur trading to Wall Street. Like that makes sense. The deal making. So that building fintech, building technology, building financial service, like that makes sense there. It's been in the play for 300 years. There's that first principles. And I've talked to a lot of people, since Houston is and will be the synthetic biology capital of the world. Because what is synthetic biology? It is the refinement and movement of chemicals. I think that Houston might know a thing or two about that. We're just changing what the chemicals are, right? And I think there's 2 or 3 unicorns in the country that do that. Solagen being one of them, based in Houston. So like I see that being one of the main things, and understanding that fundamental capability based on history, based on resources, looking at those things. Back to, like I said, when I think about the translation in Austin of atoms, bits, and intelligence, the digital meeting the physical world with those kind of intelligence. When you think about like embodied AI, I mean, some of the most robotics companies with AI, Aptronic, you've got Tesla, you've got Icon, you've got Saronic, which are all kind of different flavors of that are here. Like, yeah, that makes sense to me. You can build these types of things. I mean, I had a great conversation with some of the guys from the Gundo. And it came up like, they're like, yeah, you're going to build these things, but you can't scale them and build them in LA. And I had a really interesting, and if they hear this, it'll be interesting to hear their response to this. It'd be really interesting to see what happens in 15 years when they all are amazing successes and they have to build their gigafactories, and assuming things remain the same, and you can't build them in California. So they're building them in Texas, Ohio, Atlanta. So then if they go the way that the Gigafactory did, where the headquarters becomes those, does all the talent move with? And does the Gundo essentially get slowly gutted out because they couldn't, sustain it. And you see then the knock on effects of, okay, Valar and Rainmaker and all of them end up setting up headquarters in these other states because that's where they're going to scale.
Yeah, I mean, we just met few months ago an entrepreneur who is building in space, and they're building some really, really, really interesting technology. It's called Venus Aerospace. Almost
Oh, no,
their
Venus,
entire
yeah.
Yeah, so their entire team moved from California because they were like, "Hey, we need space. We need to be able to communicate quickly once you're at the test sites back to headquarters." Like there
Mm-hmm.
were all these logistical things that they were like, "Where should we move?" And they kind of like started looking at different places and with very specific logistical needs of the business in mind, and they chose Houston right by the space center.
Right.
And so, makes a ton of sense. They're there, they're finding a lot of success. We're super happy for them.
I mean, just
So
basically, I mean, the space is basically Austin, Houston down to Brownsville.
yeah,
Like that is going to be where the development and creation of space is going to be, and then the Florida coast. Like
yeah.
that is the future of space.
Imagine if we had a high-speed rail to get from Houston to Florida.
I would take a high speed rail down to Starbase. I went to see Starship 6, and that is a drive.
That is a drive. How far is that? It's like six
It was
hours.
like 8 hours. I had
Oh God.
two.
Yeah,
I
that's
had
far.
two of my three kids in the car, both ways.
Oh, that's even farther.
My 5 year old was like, that's a long trip. So he was mature enough to know that. But now, of course, since we watch almost every launch, now they want to go when they actually catch the Starship. But yeah, that's a long trip. But I absolutely, you said you got one on the way, but like when they're like, it is worth seeing. It is an unbelievable experience.
I've not seen it, but that sounds pretty incredible.
I the thing about this era that as we are doing more in the physical world is inspirational again. Like when I look at my parents and they were able to see like the moon landing, and then just the things that we grew up seeing, like the Challenger disaster, like they were all negative images, and only now again as we like, when Firefly went to the moon with, I don't even know if high def is the right word to use, but I'm just watching this image. I'm showing the kids, and I'm like, this is unbelievable to be able to see like this kind of imagery from the moon.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really, really fun time to live in. It's also really crazy. I think there's just going to be so much, and we have to just all be adaptable as humans. But with that being said, like, it is so much fun to think about. I know it's not the physical world, but I feel this way about what AI is doing, right? It's just like there's so many really, really, really freaking cool things that are happening right now that I get to live through that. And I
Oh,
actually get to see it happening in real time, and it's so much fun. It's so much fun to watch, and we're in the very early innings. So I can't wait.
oh,
It's gonna be an interesting world, but
just the fact of how much that is just basic. Like the kids are thinking it's normal. Like my oldest is big into chess, and we were going to a tournament, and I just pulled up, like we're driving to the tournament. I pull up Sono. I was like, I want a sports anthem rock song with my son's name as the star of the song. Go, and we have a 2 minute pump up song as we're driving there.
did he win?
He medaled this time.
Okay, it had to have been because of the pump up song. Good
That
job.
that helped. So now we've actually used that song as I play that to get him out of bed.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love that. And I mean, but that's what's also fun about it. It gets to be part of our day-to-day lives. But then there's also things, I mean, you'd have to tell me because you live in the healthcare world and I just listen or read about it. But like how many more, drugs can be developed now? How many more testing iterations those can go through before they have to go in human? Like all of these other things that are going to create like hopefully longer lifespans that are going to create and help get rid of disease. I mean, with that comes other problems that we'll be solving, but it's still just really cool to see like one, the day-to-day stuff that we get to do with it. That's fun. You know, I'm going to Aspen tomorrow to hang out with some of my Kaufman Fellow VC friends, and one of them is like, "What should I cook?" And then, anyways, long story short, I was like, "Please don't cook octopus." I've watched my octopus teacher, so I can't eat octopus anymore because they cuddle with you and it's really adorable. So I was like, I can't eat an octopus, and so it became this joke. So I had AI create like a picture of her in her like beautiful kitchen with Aspen in the background, like fighting with an octopus. So the octopus like wouldn't. So it's like the theme of the chat now. So it's just that's really fun, like silly stuff. But then there's like real things that are happening that are going to absolutely change our lives, and that's so exciting. And I know it's
Oh,
the digital world, but it comes into our physical bodies, and
all of it.
I'm hyper pumped about that.
Well, that is a great place as we're pumped up. You just moved here, so I'm going to end with the same question I ask everybody: what's next, Austin?
What's next, Austin? Okay, Mercury Fund's going to take over. No, just kidding. We're here. We're here more now than we were before. We're so excited to just hang out and see everybody, meet entrepreneurs, hopefully build a big fintech community here as time goes on. And then as we continue to scale our office and our presence in Austin, please, if you're an entrepreneur that thinks you fit with us, come on over. I think Austin has so much room to grow. And the more VC firms that are here, the better. The more entrepreneurs that are getting funding here, the better. So let's do it.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.